very good. No, that wasn't very good. Good evening. Good evening. Yes. How are y'all tonight? Good. What night is it at Vacation Bible School? The third night. Are y'all having a good time? Yes. So let's sing a few songs. And the first song is I Marvel at the Wisdom of My God. I marvel at the wisdom of my God. I marvel at the wisdom of my God. Just like the little lily pushing up the heavy sod, I marvel at the wisdom of my God. They crucified the Father's only Son. When they placed him in the tomb, they thought they won. But like the little lily pushing up the heavy sod, I marvel at the wisdom of my God. Very good. So, who knows the books of the Bible? Who knows the books of the New Testament? Let's sing about it. Let's all learn about the books of the New Testament. I think we all know. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Acts and the letters to the Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians and Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, 1st and 2nd Timothy, Titus and Philemon, Hebrews, James, 1st and 2nd Peter, 1st and 2nd, 3rd John, Jude and Revelation. Very good. So this next song is going to be a little active. All right, so I'm going to need everyone to stand up. All right, who remembers the song Father Abraham? Father Abraham. So in this song, it talks about his sons. How many sons does it say that he's had? Many. He had many sons. Father Abraham had many sons. Many sons had Father Abraham. I am one of them, and so are you. So let's all praise the Lord. Right, our Father Abraham had many sons. Many sons had Father Abraham. I am one of them, and so are you. So let's all praise the Lord. Right arm, left arm. Father Abraham had many sons. Many sons had Father Abraham. I am one of them, and so are you. So let's all praise the Lord. Right arm, left arm, right foot. Father Abraham had many sons. Many sons had Father Abraham. I am one of them, and so are you. So let's all praise the Lord. Right arm, left arm, right foot, left foot. Father Abraham had many sons. Many sons had Father Abraham. I am one of them, and so are you. So let's all praise the Lord. Right arm, left arm. I want it. Thank you, Bible class teacher. You're welcome. So, we read of a big fish. We read of a big fish in the Bible. All right, and he swallowed somebody. Who did he swallow? Jonah. He swallowed Jonah. Who did swallow Jonah? Who did swallow Jonah? Who did swallow Jonah? Who did swallow Jonah? Who did swallow Jonah down? A whale did swallow Jonah. Whale did swallow Jonah. Whale did swallow Jonah. Whale did swallow So this next song,
Yeah, good job.
so I want to thank Brother Kenny, because on this next song, he did something years ago in Vacation Bible School, and it was really special. And he led Jesus Loves Me. But in this first verse, he had just the kids sing. All right? So I'm going to ask all you kids, it's just going to be you guys sing. So you really got to sing loud. Okay? I'm going to start you out, but then you got to carry it. All right? So let's hear you sing real loud. All right? Jesus loves me,
this I know, for the Bible tells me so. Little ones to him belong. They are weak, but he is strong. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. The Bible tells me so.
Jesus loves me when I'm good, and I do the things I should. Jesus loves me when I'm bad, but it makes him very sad. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. The Bible tells me so. I love Jesus, does he know? Have I ever told him so? Jesus likes to hear me say that I love him every day. Yes, I love Jesus. Yes, I love Jesus. Yes, I love Jesus. In prayer I tell him so. Very good. So before we go to class, I'm going to ask Brother Will, if you would leave a prayer, and then we will sing Tiptoe, and then head to Bible class. Brother Will.
Bow with me. Most gracious and awesome Heavenly Father, we come before you now in this awesome week where we get to study your word each and every day, Lord. I pray that as we go throughout VBS, Lord, we take what we learned about your creation, Lord, and I pray that we apply it to our hearts and apply it to our minds. We're ready to make a defense for you, Lord. I pray that you help us to have a great rest of the week, Lord. I pray that we give it our all, Lord. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
All right, so last night, what did we have up here?
White mouse, the earth, the sun,
Earth, the moon, and then the stars were up here, and look what we have tonight.
trees,
I wonder what you're going to be talking about tonight in Bible class.
stars are doing.
Tiptoe, tiptoe in God's house. Tiptoe, tiptoe in God's house. Tiptoe, tiptoe in God's house. Be as white as a little mouse. Whisper, whisper in God's house. Whisper, whisper in God's house. Whisper, whisper in God's house. Be as white as a little mouse.
material I have because the lesson really fits into two neat sections and one titled, this is a good compromise, I believe. We're going to be talking about not only hoaxes that have been purported as genuine scientific evidence, but also some experiments that have been done that were hailed as landmark decisions and, in my opinion, leave more questions unanswered than answered. Before we begin, I'd like to, I have to use this button. I'd like to start with this quote I found just a few days ago from Naomi Oreskes, who is a professor of science history at Harvard University. I know it's a lot, but this came out in Scientific American this month. The context of the article is that she was addressing the growth of the anti-vaccine movement, and she used it as a springboard to talk about why some people have become so bitterly opposed to science in general, and why some people have become so, why they praise it at every turn. And I think that what she says here is worth bearing in mind. Science is is a process of learning and discovery. It can also be understood as an institution, or better, a set of institutions that facilitates this work. In my view, the biggest mistake scientists make is to claim that this is all somehow simple, and therefore to imply anyone who doesn't get it is a dunce. Science is not simple. We're going to be talking about some things that I can barely get my head around because the volume of material that has been produced on these particular subjects tonight is vast and it is deep. I am not a science historian and I am not Don Patton. So, just, you've been warned. This lesson has a few objectives. We are going to examine several discoveries that were made within the last 150, 200 years or so that were later exposed as forgeries or at best very badly identified. We're going to be talking about willful deception and simple carelessness. We're going to highlight the confusion that arises from the interchangeable use of words like evolution, adaptation, species, natural selection, and so forth, and how narrowing parameters can be beneficial to any discussion. And 3, we're going to discuss how some phenomena are beyond the scope of measurement and scientific experiment in a controlled environment. What this lesson will not do is perpetuate the existence of a science power conspiracy. During the American Civil War and the period leading up to it, there were 2 popular conspiracy theories. In the North, they believed that the government was controlled by all the rich landowners in the South, and in the South, they believed that the government was controlled by all the bleeding heart abolitionists in the North. And you know what happened as a result of that. This lesson is not intended to label all evolutionists as frauds because of the unscrupulous actions of a few. You can't tell a lie without knowing that you are telling a lie. And this lesson will not tell you everything you need to know about these particular subjects. This is, at best, just an introduction. The first topic that we're going to talk about tonight, no, I don't want to right-click, is this illustration right here. How many, by a show of hands, recognize this picture? Okay, not too many. Well, don't feel bad because I didn't see this growing up either. This is a copy. I know it's not a very good copy, but this is a copy of an illustration that was done by a man named Ernest Hoeckel back in 1868 to promote his idea of a theory called ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. Now, I know it's a bunch of word salad, so let's define what we mean. Ontogeny is the growth of an individual organism through the fertilization process to its birth or to its hatching, and phylogeny is the evolutionary history of a group of organisms, which is usually depicted as a family tree that allegedly traces all life back to a single ancestor. Like many evolutionists, Hoeckel believed that most species and all life itself could be traced back to one ancestor. His theory can best be explained as such: that the development of a single organism while it is in the womb or in the egg repeats developments of its earlier ancestors. The chart that you're looking at is arranged from left to right It's not meant to be read left to right, but it's arranged in columns. Starting from the left, you have fish, you have animals like chicken and salamander and hog, and at the very far end of the right, which I just now see is barely visible, you have humans. Hoeckel's theory purported that because we all have a common ancestor, every species in its embryonic development has characteristics and physical traits of the other species. He purported that humans, for example, according to the drawings, you would see markings on the neck, and he said those were gills because we come from aquatic ancestors of primordial soup. And this theory was based on work done by German philosophers and naturalists in the 1790s, and it was popular, very influential for a long time. He specifically said that the embryos reproduce the traits of their adult ancestors. The quote that you see on the screen was by a man named Jonathan Wells, who was commenting on it. Although vertebrate embryos never resemble the adults of any species, it is true that they pass through an intermediate stage in which some of them superficially resemble each other. Another scientist named Carl Ernst von Baer concluded that early embryos exhibit features common to the phylum, that's a huge category just below the kingdom. It's on that chart from life to kingdom to phylum, and then you get down to species and family and so forth. They exhibit these features before developing distinguishing characteristics of their family or their species. And he wrote that in 1828. Biologists now prefer von Baer's interpretation to Hoeckel's, but the drawings have survived even though the latter has been discredited, and unfortunately the drawings do not adequately represent the facts, or they misrepresent the facts. As far as the gills comment goes, a further study has shown that the markings on the neck are not gills. They're called pharyngeal pouches that develop into other aspects of the body, such as the inner ear and so forth. Real gills, from what I read, develop outward as they grow and become more pronounced and more distinct. Well, why is this drawing important? It's important because, first of all, this is one of the most widely reproduced illustrations in the history of biology. It is in textbooks, it's on the internet. The context in which it is published, only I could guess. No doubt some people use it as a cornerstone of their belief in evolution. Other people may just have it as an example, but it is, despite the fact that it has now been thoroughly discredited, it is still being printed far and wide, which may mean that it's just infamous, but it certainly ranks up there with one of the most talked about pictures of all time. Hoeckel's work was published in the middle of Prussia, now just a province of Germany, but at the time it was an independent country, during the Kulturkampf. The culture struggle against the Catholic Church. They were trying to wrest control of education from the Vatican, among other things, like foreign policy. Interesting to note that Hoeckel did not cite any sources for this drawing, which even back then opened him up to severe criticism and even charges of fraud. Some people claimed that he simply invented these drawings with no anatomical basis whatsoever. He was highly educated, but his drawings were said to contribute nothing new to the field of embryology. And despite being discredited, it's still around. This is one example of, it kind of sets a theme that we're going to see, that there is a significant influence that culture and politics will play on science. When most people say, I trust in science, in my personal experience, when I hear people say that, it's usually within the context of a very contentious issue like transgenderism, something that is hotly debated in politics, in social circles, and scientists are being called in to weigh, and their expert opinion is supposed to be the final word on whether or not a thing exists or whether it doesn't. Some people may say, I trust in the scientific method, but I think what people usually mean by that is, I trust in the collection of people who represent the popular scientific consensus. Hence, I wanted to start with that quote by Dr. Oreskes, because she points out something very poignant, I think. Science is not just this uniform body of people in white coats that are always playing on the same team, that are always supporting each other. There is just as much intrigue in the history of science as there is in any daytime soap opera. But this is our introductory case for tonight. Questions, comments? People have told me that they have seen this picture growing up. I never looked at this when I was growing up. It was never in any science book, and even I went to public schools for a while. Yes?
So this was just making me think, when we talk about science, the scientific method, it's methodical, this is how it's done, there's no emotion or like agenda put into it, it's just observing the natural realm. That's not true. Science has politics in it just like everything else. An example, a very recent example I'm thinking of, is the journal article that tried to link vaccinations to autism. Like that whole article itself was fraudulent and published anyway, and it's caused so much harm that we talk about people not getting vaccinated. That publication was in circulation for 10 years before it got to the back and how much damage it's done. Same thing because people don't retract them even though they're false, it causes a lot of damage.
Which journal was that? Because I've heard that story for years, that people believe that the vaccinations cause autism, but I never traced it to its origin.
It was either the New England Journal or it was the Lancet, I'm not sure.
Okay.
But I mean, like basically, I read the article just for a journal club for schools, and the whole thing was fraud. I mean, money was paid to. I'm not sure, but I mean, it just goes to show you that there are politics and agendas even in science, even in medicine. As much as we would like to, hope and believe that there's not, there is, and even in recent times, and it still does damage to this day.
Yep, that's true. One funny example of bias that I like to think about is in one of the Jurassic Park movies, it was the third one, the big selling point of that movie was that Tyrannosaurus Rex was going to fight against Spinosaurus aegypticus, which was a massive predator that was found in North Africa. And the Spinosaurus aegypticus was portrayed as a giant bipedal carnivore that could kill a Tyrannosaurus Rex in single combat. The problem was that the paleontologist who was consulting with the film studio failed to mention that all the evidence showed Spinosaurus aegypticus was a quadrupod. It was on 4 legs and would probably not have been able to win in a fight like that. But this particular man was very fond of Spinosaurus aegypticus and pitched it to them as such. It's a kind of a joke among fans of the franchise, but I digress. And politics is going to come up over and over again in a lot of these instances. It's worth noting that Charles Darwin himself was alive when Hoeckel's illustrations were making their rounds, and although he praised Hoeckel's efforts, they had disagreements on the finer points of whether or not this was true. Jonathan Wells, in the article that I've cited for the picture, he points out that a number of species are omitted from this illustration. We have a salamander, but we don't have a large cross-section of amphibians. We have a chicken, but we don't have any birds that can fly, which, again, he's thinking at a much higher level than I can. He took it as something that undermined Hoeckel's position. Let's see, what else do we have? For over a century after his death in 1919, experts have tried to conclusively determine whether or not he invented his embryos out of thin air, or whether he took some liberties with what was known about embryo anatomy at the time. There doesn't seem, from what I could tell, there doesn't seem to be any real evidence that they were forged in the legal sense of the word. but one has to ask why an image that misrepresents the facts is so widely circulated. Again, this is where I think we have to be very careful, and I'm going to demonstrate that with some other examples later, but just keep that question in the back of your mind. What can we learn from this? Yes?
Sorry.
You're okay.
And like just looking at this picture, whether it's right or wrong, I just couldn't help think, oh, you just had a baby. Oh, this person over here had a baby. I can't tell them apart. They look like this. And you get back far enough, everything looks alike. Everything comes from the same cell. And to me, that doesn't point to, common ancestor. That points to design. That they all would look the same. Because as we've been talking about this week, evolution should tend towards chaos. It should tend towards very different things appearing. And this looks like order to me.
Well, we're about to talk about order, but I'm glad you brought that up because there is a field of study, let's see, what is it called? Homology, which is all about the study of similarities between one species and another. That's a huge can of worms. We don't have time to get into it because I don't understand it myself. But the next experiment is, or the next finding, this is something that I never heard of in my life. Show of hands, how many people recognize these men or these names? Stanley Miller and Milor-Urey. Okay, that makes me feel better. Because this is one of those landmark experiments, one of those landmark findings that is talked about, apparently. The Miller-Urey experiment was conducted in 1952 by these two men here. It was designed to test whether or not organic compounds could be synthesized out of non-organic material. And they wanted to do this because they were studying the conditions of the atmosphere in Earth's primitive history. It's an experiment that explores the origins of life. So that was their objective, and the experiment has been duplicated. Here's how they did it. I know that you cannot read the labels, so don't try. I'll explain what's going on. The apparatus that you see here is very simple. At the bottom right, you have a flask of water, which is then heated to produce a gas that then goes up into the larger bulb where there are gas elements, hydrogen, methane, ammonia, and two electrodes that will generate a spark whenever they push a button. The experiment was conducted with water, methane, ammonia, hydrogen, designed to simulate an atmosphere of primitive Earth. And as the story goes, when they heated the gas, they put it through the bulb, they hit the button, they shot it full of electricity, and then they condensed it and took a sample of it. The result is that they had produced 5 identifiable amino acids. Now, amino acids are a doctor's Stubblefield, correct me if I'm wrong, but you would say that that's a vital component in organic chemistry. You have to have them.
You have to have them
To make protein, which is also very important.
You can't live without protein.
Can't live without protein, so you have to have amino acids to get protein to live. Now, this would seem like a huge step. It kind of reminds me of the old Frankenstein movies where you can bring anything to life if you just pump it full of electricity. However, the experiment was repeated in 1983 with very different results. And the reason it had bad results is because they changed their minds on what was likely present in the atmosphere during this long, long ago period in Earth's history. His student, a man named Jeffrey Baba, discovered in his own experiments that the reaction was producing nitrites, which were destroying the amino acids, the majority of them, before they could form. And he believed, I don't know based on what, but he believed that Earth's atmosphere would have carbon and ion minerals that would have prevented this from happening. I know this is really complicated, and I did not pass chemistry, so look this up on your own time. But his own experiment, after he made all the tweaks and the revisions and all the modifications to get it right, produced a lot of amino acids. So on the surface, you'd think that, okay, well, these two guys made a good first attempt, and this guy perfected it, but there are dissenters. James Tour is a name that I only recently learned about. He was quoted in this video on YouTube say that when we try to make amino acids, and he builds compounds for a living. This kind of work is what he does for a day job. Quote, when we try to make amino acids today, we are still getting vast arrays of mixtures. They are still becoming racemic, and it may be 50%. Racemic, as I just learned about 20 minutes ago, is a word which means that the amino acids are mixed with other things. They're not completely pure, for lack of a better word. And he goes on to say that you are asking nature to purify something in a primordial soup that you can't purify in a laboratory. Because what does this apparatus denote? I look at this and I see a lot of control. They had a specific amount of water, they had a specific temperature that they would heat the water at to produce their gas. I don't know how much electricity they used to make their spark, I don't know if you could measure it, but they had certain quantities of gases. They make the amino acids, and that's supposed to be definitive proof that organic life could spontaneously appear out of chemicals during a lightning storm. That is my problem with a lot of these experiments. This is a highly controlled scenario designed to replicate conditions on a vast spectrum in a huge space with probably a lot more energy and a lot more things at work. As I was reading about this, I kept hearing, oh, amino acids, that's really great. And my thought is, where's the DNA? Yes, we've got it's like you have 2x4s, but no blueprint on how to put the house together. Let's see, where's the next one? Nope, that is way too fast. Yes, Jonathan.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You have 2x4s. You don't even have the 2x4s put together. They haven't even managed to put two amino acids together.
That's true. As I was looking up more information about these experiments and their relevance and the future of the field and what other people have said, I found another article on Scientific American, and I don't seem to have the title written down, but they were discussing Mr. Baba's experiments, and another researcher had a problem with the experiment because their contention was that, oh, well, all the other material that you would need for organic life must have been introduced to Earth from outer space in the form of carbon molecules deposited by meteorites. Like, well, where is all of this coming from? We've addressed this question before. The initial singularity with all the energy and matter and space-time that just explodes, how did it get there? I'm tripping over myself because this is an experiment that is, again, championed as a landmark in proving that such and such theory is true, but I came away from reading about this with more questions than I had before. You had your hand up, I think.
Yes. If this proves anything, it proves theistic evolution. It proves that there was some mind ahead of time knowing what it would take and arranging things in a favorable way. Only humans could do that here, or only some kind of God could do that ahead of time.
Yeah,
because he knew exactly what he wanted.
The introduction of a spark during a experiment like this does not really seem random to me, which I'm not scientifically trained. They'd probably have an answer for that, but Jonathan.
Yeah, this is another neat observation I have about this experiment. It's not that they haven't done this already. There've already been some people that have come and looked at they were able to make organic molecules from inorganic materials. They weren't amino acids, it was urea specifically. And that was kind of a big discovery then because they used to think that urea could only be produced by life form. So I don't know why they think it's surprising that they can make organic molecules from inorganic substrate because it's already been done.
Yeah, some of these experiments, it's kind of like addressing the question, why do some books become bestsellers and others don't? I mean, seriously, you look at some popular titles and you think, how could 50 million people buy copies of this? I don't like this book at all. And then you find out to your horror that nobody likes your favorite book. That's the most confusing part to me about, I can understand the objective, I can understand the parameters and what they were trying to prove, but why these experiments were hailed as the great achievements is what I can't understand. But Miller is called the father of prebiotic chemistry. I'm not even sure what prebiotic is supposed to mean, but that's just how out of my element I am. Any more questions or comments? David.
I guess I always look at research with a lot of skepticism because a lot of this is backed by statistics. And if I have a hypothesis that I think I should get, and I put together a statistical model and I get a different conclusion, it's easy to assume my model is wrong, and I can go back and change my input variables and eventually get the result I want and publish that. So, you see some of these things, I want, is the statistical model correct, or did they just keep manipulating it until they got the result they wanted?
Well, both of these men are dead. I don't know if we could ever have the answer to that. Anything else before we go on? Yes.
I'm glad you mentioned earlier that we can't accuse all scientists of being guilty of those hoaxes unless they use them or unless they endorse them in some way and give their approval. And that works both ways. As Christians, we don't like to be labeled with all the hoaxes in religion.
Agreed.
And a lot of times people want to paint Christianity or religion with a broad brush and make us feel guilty because the Catholic Church persecuted Copernicus or Galileo, and the Catholic Church is wrong. And it makes us look bad because we're religious, but we don't accept that. We think the Catholic Church was wrong too. And same thing with some of these people here. We want to be fair to them, but we also want to be treated fairly too.
That is a perfect segue into the next section. This is the big one. How many of you recognize this? Okay, I thought so. Like Hoeckel's Embryos, the peppered moth is an icon of evolutionary teaching. I never learned about these growing up, but apparently enough of you have. It is perhaps the most closely scrutinized insect of the last 150 years. It has been studied in minute detail by people from all over the world, both on the creationist side, that's a modern term, but I'm just going to use it in place of something else, and the evolutionist side. It's also one of the most infamous cases of people who believe in God making what I consider to be outright baseless accusations, and which is one more reason why it's featured here tonight. What follows is a cursory understanding of the facts. You could spend a lifetime studying all the aspects of this particular case. So, let's do a bit of background information. The English peppered moth has always existed, as far as we know, in two varieties, one that is mostly white and one that is mostly black. Until the Industrial Revolution, it is supposed that the black one was not as common as it became. It just wasn't seen that often. But around 1864, people began observing larger numbers of the black-colored moths. Well, this is when the Industrial Revolution is in full swing. The story goes that from between London to Manchester, there was so much coal being used for fuel in the new factories. And what's a byproduct of burning coal? Coal dust. The story goes that the countryside and the vegetation was just blanketed with coal dust, which means that the white-colored moths, they would come to rest on a tree trunk or a branch, and they would be easily found by the birds that ate them. And so this led to the term industrial melanism. Melanism is all about the pigment of hair and fur and the color of other animals. And it was the first time that people began to observe that, oh, maybe the industry is having an impact on these animals, these creatures. But the first scientific paper on the subject wasn't published till 1896, and the evolutionist J. Tutt was the first one to declare that it is a definitive example of natural selection happening before our eyes. This is considered important for this reason, among many. It was within Darwin's lifetime. People like to throw that out there. There were others like Albert Farn, who wrote a letter to Darwin saying that he had seen other phenomenon with different moth species in southern England where lime kilns had been active for years, but as far as we know, Darwin did not respond. It is supposed by some that he believed natural selection had to take place over a longer period of time, but that's up in the air. No one really knows what's going on with that. From 1953 to 1955, two men, Bernard Kettlewell and E. Ford, were the first ones to conduct an experiment on this phenomenon. The experiment was to capture moths, mark them with a special type of paint just a little bit so that they could be identified, and then they were going to release them into an aviary. I don't know how much land was involved, but they were going to release these moths into the aviary, and then they were going to test how camouflage affected survival. Viable objective of a scientific experiment. We've observed changes in this population. Let's see how it affects their survival. They concluded that, well, obviously birds are the main predators of the moth, that moths were eaten selectively by birds in polluted and clean forests based on the color. In light areas, with trees that were not dark, the dark moths were rapidly eliminated because they stood out, even if they were artificially introduced into a particular area that they had not been seen in before. They met some criticism in the beginning. A biologist named Theodore Sargent said that based on his own experiments in 1965 and 69, that it was impossible to reproduce the results of the experiment, and that the birds really showed no preference. But things really got out of hand. Jerry Coyne, who was another prominent scientist, said that there are better examples of natural selection, and we should just put this one aside. But in 2001, someone named Michael Majerus decided to reproduce the experiment as best he could, and he spent the last 6 years of his life doing so. He died before he could finish his work, and it had to be picked up by 4 other people who made his material ready for publication. And it was said that it vindicates the original experiment. Well, Philip Johnson, who founded the intelligent design movement, really made headlines when he accused Kettlewell and Ford of outright fraud. Everything about the experiment was a hoax. There was no viable evidence to suggest that anything that they said was true. They even went as far as to say that for certain pictures, they staged them by gluing the insect onto the tree trunks. Where these bugs rested in the daytime became such a vital component of the debate that people would dedicate entire studies to find out, where do these bugs rest the majority of the time? A tree trunk, a tree branch, or on the ground? That's how much people were invested in this. And I'm sad to say that a lot of Philip Johnson's accusations are still being published and taught as fact in a lot of creationist publications. And I don't know if there's anything to suggest that that's true, but it's very bold to say not only are you wrong, but you are a cheater, a liar, you staged this elaborate ruse and tried to fool everybody. As Jonathan, I think it was you in your lesson when you said that when you make a declarative statement, the burden of proof is on you. The story was picked up by Judith Hooper in her 2002 book of Moths and Men, which studied the experiments and the men behind them and popularizing many of the objections. Now, how is a guy supposed to make sense of all this? We've spent over 150 years studying the life cycle of an insect. All I can say is that birds still eat bugs and some change color. The moth has always existed. The caterpillars have always demonstrated an ability to mimic the colors of the twigs that they rest on. That was what the first picture was. According to Darwin himself, and this is a direct quote from Origin of the Species, natural selection is the principle by which each slight variation of a trait, if useful, is preserved. My question is, and this is, I'm not looking for definitive answers, but I welcome your comments. How is this experiment a definitive proof of natural selection when they already had the ability to change color based on the situation? Thank you, Jonathan.
Sure. If you look for answers, so this kind of relates to what always strikes me about this example. It's an example of microevolution, variation within a kind. And we have lots of different kinds of dogs. If next week some alien bird flies in from the sky and starts eating all the chihuahuas, the average size of dogs is going to increase. And there's nothing about a new species being formed or what have you. That is a kind of natural selection, although I guess it's kind of unnatural in my hypotheticals. And it is a survival of the fittest. The fitness of the chihuahuas would have gone way down. But that's nothing new and nothing we object to. Microevolution is a real thing that is very clearly happening. There's nothing happening there that's a moth changing into a bird. It's variation within a kind. So I don't know why they would point to this as evidence for creationism not being true. This is just something that happens.
Yes.
Well, along with what Jonathan's saying there about microevolution, and we talked about that the other night, the same thing with Darwin's finches. When he was on the Galapagos Islands and he did all this study of the finches, he observed that they had different shapes and sizes of beaks. But from start to finish, they were always finches. And that was microevolution, but a lot of people kind of jumped to the conclusion, well, he proved macroevolution. No, he didn't. He proved microevolution. And we believe in microevolution because we see the variety within kinds.
Yeah. This is a terrible analogy, and I hope I can articulate it in a way that will make sense. But I can't think of another analogy, so bear with me. In my own time, I have observed, this may make sense only to people that play video games, whenever a new game console is released, you know, they advertise the graphics and what it can do, but by the time the console gets to the end of its life, the games that they make at the end of its life look very different from the ones that came out with the system when it was brand new. Because gaming technology got better, but it's still within that one gaming system. I guess the flexibility of nature's design is kind of what I think of when I think of peppered moths, when I think of the average size of people. If you go to a museum that shows clothing from the 19th century, and you know, I'm 6'2" and I weigh about 220 pounds, I could not wear the uniform of your average private during the Civil War because they had a waist about like this. Now think about all the factors that contribute to that difference. Hard manual labor, 12 to 16 hours a day, lack of modern medicine, diet was very different, and our situation now is completely opposite. We don't spend 16 hours a day out in the field just to grow enough food to eat and barely get by. We don't have to do everything with hand tools. We have air conditioning, we have antibiotics, and a lot of other things that they did not. And that's just my mind going ahead of my outline. But I am always attracted to this because I think that people, especially Philip Johnson, said a lot of things that were not only unnecessary but damaging to people who may want to dissent to the popular belief in this particular example. I have a quote from, this is also from Jonathan Wells in a different article called Revenge of the Peppered Moths, which appeared in Evolution News in February 2012. He says, quote, Darwinian evolution requires much more than the selection of beneficial traits and much more than a shift in the proportions of light and dark-colored moths. It requires the descent with modification of all living things from one or a few common ancestors. Darwin did not write a book called How the Proportions of Two Pre-Existing Moth Varieties Can Change Through Natural Selection. He wrote a book called On the Origin of the Species by Means of Natural Selection. Majerus went on to say that there were a tremendous number of examples of Darwinian selection in action, and indeed there are. Beak changes on the Galapagos finches, for example. Natural selection happens. I've never met anyone who doubts it. The question is whether or not natural selection can produce new species, new organs, and new body plans. This question is not answered by shifts in the proportion of pre-existing varieties of the same species. Even if the camouflage predation explanation for industrial melanism was undisputed, it would not get us any closer to proving Darwinian evolution. Can we take a step back and understand why wordplay is so important when dealing with this topic? Yes?
It's like, I kept thinking this, and I'm going to say it kind of tongue in cheek a little bit, so bear with me, but in a way, it kind of means the pepper moth is a fraud, because they're being kind of fraudulent when they say, look, this proves that you're wrong, because pepper moths, yada yada, and less evolution is true. It has nothing to do with it.
Yeah, this is, a lot of people have spent a lot of years of their life arguing about these little things, and they're just blissfully unaware of it the whole time. So, any final questions, thoughts, or comments on this baby before we get into the next half of the lesson? Someone remind me how much time I've got. 20 minutes. Oh, we may outrun the outline. Okay. All right. This is actually my last slide, but I ran out of time. I wasn't able to spritz it up like the others. We're going to talk about missing links. Kyle, you'll probably get to address this with your lesson on, I think you've got dinosaurs, right? Okay, so you're going to talk a lot about fossils. I wish Don Patton was here for this because this is his ball field, not mine. We mentioned transitional fossils in one of the previous lessons, and it's one of those things that Darwin himself recognized as vitally important to his theory. He wrote about it. He said that the fossil record should reflect a number of these transitional fossils, and they're not there. That's what he wrote. I'm more or less paraphrasing. That's what he wrote in Origin of the Species. If my theory is true, this ought to be reflected in the fossil record, but I can't find it. And he willingly admitted that it was a serious weakness that he couldn't adequately account for. Now, yes?
And so he blamed the fossil record for being so fragmentary and slanted in the direction against his theory. So he complained about his evidence.
I guess you could say that it was a complaint.
I mean, that's what they said, that we just don't have enough fossils as yet. Not enough have been preserved. Only a few, and they don't prove evolution, which is what we want them to do.
Well, this section of the lesson it's kind of half and half. We've got some hoaxes in here, and then we've got some where people got overexcited and made an erroneous conclusion. The first one is called Nebraska Man, which is a name that was attributed to a tooth that was found in 1922, and it made big news because if it was true, it was going to be the first discovery of a higher ape in North America, which had never been done before. But it was later discovered that it was a peccary tooth, which is a type of pig. They built a whole person out of a tooth, and they retracted their findings in 1927. Piltdown Man. This is another infamous case. It's almost as infamous as the peppered moth, but for different reasons. 1912, a man discovered bones near Piltdown, which is in East Sussex, which is in England, and he assembled what he considered to be an accurate skull and jawbone and some other bone fragments and said, this is a person that lived 500,000 years ago. And it was not exposed as a deliberate forgery conclusively until 1953. The guy's name was Charles Dawson. He was an amateur anthropologist, and everything about it was a complete fabrication. Evidence later showed that he had actually taken a composite of different species, partial human remains with partial orangutan remains and kind of just put them together like Lego pieces, even to the point of filing down the teeth on the orangutan jaw to make them look a little more like human teeth. And from the brief reading that I did about his life, it was not the first forgery nor the last one that he pulled off. But it took the world by storm when it was discovered, and even though there were suspicions in the beginning, nobody stepped forward with the definite proof that it was all a hoax until 1953, by which point, of course, he was dead. The next one, yes, Jordan.
And this is just another example of like whenever someone puts their own agenda into what should be pure scientific thought. If you look, the example I gave, you know, okay, article about vaccines, about for 10 years I took it back, all the damage that did. This was over 40 years. Look how much damage it's doing today.
Yeah.
And just because someone had an agenda that they really wanted to be true.
Yes,
Yeah,
Alma.
what this shows is one's profession dictates to one, and the only ways to get ahead in your profession are you do something special, you know it, that gets the attention of Harvard and other places, whether you want a higher educational position or whatever you want. If you can't come up with something special, how in the world can you get ahead?
You know, it's funny you mention that because that even happens in history as well. You know, I'm a historian, and a coworker of mine was complaining about she had written an article about a long time ago about German POWs in America, and she turned it into this journal, and they responded and said, this is really good, but they had a problem with it. The problem was that all she was doing was telling the story. She was not making any kind of argument one way or the other that was supposed to put a new spin on our understanding of the German POWs in America. And they were very interested to know how much money did the labor of these German POWs generate. She said, I have no way to quantify that. All the records are gone, the camps are gone, and all these people are dead. And she was very disappointed by that. And your comment reminded me.
Yeah, so then either forget it or fake it.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, that's an example that shows how people that are highly educated, highly intelligent can be duped. Because between that period, 1912 and 1953, Piltdown Man was in the dictionary as being a real thing, a fact, as evidence of evolution. Of course, after 1953, you can see the change in the dictionaries. They corrected it. But as Jordan mentioned, for 40 years, people were fooled by that.
There's a painting that someone did depicting Charles Dawson and a number of other leading experts in their field, which they were all older men, and the picture may be apocryphal, but it shows them all huddled around this table as they put this skull together. They examined the bones. That's probably not when the forgery was arranged, but I mean, there were lots of people that examined this thing. It's not like he just stepped forward and said, oh, hey, I found a 500,000-year-old man, and everyone immediately took it for granted. But for some reason, whatever reservations were not adequately expressed, he wasn't challenged enough and got away with it for a long time.
Sensationalism was louder than truth.
That's a good point. All right, tell me if you've ever heard this before. Water causes cancer. Chocolate causes cancer. Breathing causes cancer. Yeah, we are bombarded with that kind of sensationalism in the guise of science today. Every time you turn around, there's like, oh, here's some new thing that causes cancer. Until you actually start digging into the studies and the control groups and how they did the study and what the parameters were, and then you think, oh, okay, you're trying to sell me something. The third example, I don't know how to pronounce this. It's Spanish. I thought it was ochre man, but that may not be right. 1982, so fairly recent. This comes from Spain. This goes back to Jordan's comment about politics. And it also goes back to our example of the culture struggle in Hoeckel's day. 1982, a single bone fragment was found in Spain, and it was claimed to be part of the oldest human fossil in Europe. Later identified as part of a donkey. I don't have a picture of it on the slide, but they claimed that it was part of the back of a skull, of a human skull. They thought that it was, maybe a human child. And if you read, there is a great retrospective, and I'm sorry I can't provide the link. It slipped my mind as I was coming here. There's a link that somebody wrote an article on a retrospective of the cultural situation in Spain at the time this thing was dug up. There was a lot of excitement at the thought that the Spanish, of all people, were going to be the ones to find this groundbreaking fossil record. And there were a lot of other things going on. I think 1982 is not too long after Francisco Franco died, who was the fascist dictator in Spain for a long time. But there was a lot more writing on this discovery being confirmed than just, oh, well, we carbon dated the bone and it's a person. It was retracted within a year of the re-identification. It's an excellent case study of social and political influences. All right, who's heard of Lucy? Everybody's heard of Lucy. Discovered in the 1970s in Ethiopia, supposed to be one of the most complete skeletal remains of a human ancestor ever found. It is still considered one of the greatest finds of the century, if not the millennia, a benchmark of anthropology and paleontology and all those others. Like the peppered moth, it has been studied in meticulous, excruciating detail. Excruciating to the point that people write papers on the angle of the bones in the wrist and the shape of the knee, and is this features of a chimpanzee, or is this an ape, or is it truly human? I'm not even going to pretend to know where everybody falls. Is she human? Is she a chimp? Or is she some other primate that's not related to either of those? It's been going on for years. There was even a piece of skeletal remains that were thought to be, they called it Lucy's baby. If I remember the story correctly, they found more bones somewhere nearby and thought that the two of them may have been related. I may be wrong on that, so don't quote me. Some people question whether or not she could give birth to infants because of the shape of her pelvis. And I see a pattern with a lot of these so-called missing links. In fact, I'd have to look this up, but it seems that of all the cases that have been made for transitional fossils, there are more alleged connections between humans and primates that are touted than any other species. I would be very interested to know how many transitional fossils for amphibians and reptiles have been held up, because these are the ones that get the most press. And if, big if here, if there are more alleged missing links between humans and primates that are being discovered or hypothesized or being reconstructed, that would say something to me about the intentions of the people that are doing these studies. I may not, if there were just as many missing link reptile fossils being touted, then I'd probably change my mind. But that struck me as odd. Yes?
I think partly because you're talking about the evolution of man there, and that's the most important to us. I was thinking about your point about Nebraska man being generated from one pig's tooth. You've got the Heidelberg man that's one jawbone. So you're taking like a pig's tooth, that's less than a fraction of a percent. So it's 99% imagination and 1% genuine tooth. Heidelberg man about the same thing, maybe 98% imagination. And when artists draw these for science textbooks that children study in school, they'll add, if they find skeletons, or just one jawbone, they'll add the whole human body to it with the flesh and hair and all, which is all imagination, because they don't know about all of that for sure, but it's guesswork, but it's presented as fact. And children in school studied it, and they learned it as though it's fact, when it 99% imagination.
Yeah, it is. There's been a lot of discussion in this lesson about things that keep appearing in textbooks, and that's one thing I liked about Don Patton's meeting, because he talked about a time in which he was on a textbook advisory committee, and I had never really thought about how textbooks are printed and written. People always complained about the quality of textbooks, which shows that there's a disconnect between cutting-edge modern science and what is being filtered down into the public schools. There is a big difference between the historical topics that are being discussed among PhD academics in the peer-reviewed journals and what you see on the so-called History Channel. Yes, Almond.
I can't remember the author of this book, but the book is entitled Bones of Contention. Now, not this bone of contention, that's in a different book. But this fellow has the most brilliant answer to the evolutionists about the evolution of human beings, because he says, okay, these evolutionists say here at this time we can prove that they were getting close to being human. He says, well, I can show you studies that show from evolutionists that there were human beings, full human beings at that time, so these couldn't have been the progenitors of those. He said, you take any time you want, going back as far as you want to, saying, now look, now we're getting close to humans. He said, others have done studies to show that there were actually fully human beings at that particular time. So all you're showing is forms existing at the same time. You're not proving that these forms, whatever they really are the progenitors of modern human form.
I think I've heard of that book, but I can't say that I've...
I mean, it's hard to answer that guy.
Well, I'll have to look that up. Science is way beyond my forte, but Jordan mentioned that, how things change all the time in the scientific field. And let's be honest, that's a good thing in most cases. I'm glad that you don't have to open your veins and bleed a patient to cure them of pneumonia like we were doing in the 18th century. I'm glad for the advancements that we have, but there seems to be a problem, just like there is everywhere else. It's not special. We shouldn't wail or gnash our teeth at it. An example of things changing, you mentioned humans existing at the same time as other creatures. Everybody knows what the mastodon was? Okay, a uniquely American creature. And for a long time, people thought that, humans did not coexist with the mastodon. That was 10,000 years before man, until a scientist digging in close to St. Louis, Missouri, just so happened upon a fossilized mastodon bone with a Clovis spear point touching the bone, which conclusively proved that not only did mankind arrive on the North American continent 10,000 years before anybody suspected, but they actually hunted the mastodon. And all it took was one discovery. And now, well, of course we existed with the mastodon. But not exactly the kind of example you were talking about, but that's what came to mind. We've only got, 10 minutes left or less time than that? 5. Okay, good. Less pressure on me. Like I said at the beginning of this lesson, it takes a lot to run a scientific experiment. What we have seen tonight is a lot of good, honest attempts by some people, a lot of deception by other people, and it makes me respect the honest work that people do even more, and makes me confused at the rest of it. I'm glad I'm a historian and I just have to study people. I'm sorry?
But the people are your problem.
Well, yeah. Any final thoughts or comments on this lesson? We've got to the end of my presentation, end of my notes. I've really got nothing else to say. Yes, Jordan.
Do you have more details about Lucy?
I do up here. I wasn't able to transfer them over to PowerPoint. I can read something aloud if that's something you'd be okay with, or
I'm just like, was it a fraud?
wasn't a fraud. No, these are real fossilized remains that they discovered on a dig. The debate has been whether or not she was truly a hominoid or a different type of primate, whether she's truly human or whether she was more closely related to a chimpanzee or an orangutan. And that's where the controversy about the locking wrists come in, because human wrists don't do that. According to the paper I've got in front of me, locking wrist is common to quadrupeds, and they've studied the circular canals located within the ears. That paragraph does. Sandra, did you have your hand up?
How many bones?
Let me see. It doesn't say on the paper, but let me flip it over. Nope, it's not there either. If I remember correctly from something I read online, it was about 40. It's not a complete skeleton. They have a skull. They have a part of a skull, a few ribs, some arm bones, a partial leg, and some feet.
Still a lot of imagination.
Yes, they have arranged her in what they think is the correct order. And they have reproduced the fossils in a cast mold because they don't want to take the chance of them getting broken or destroyed. And so a lot of museums, they don't have the original thing. You see a mold replica on display.
Well, that brings up the point about the imagination. Artists have been used to draw these characters, what they would look like with flesh and hair and all that, for different textbooks, and different artists have looked at the same skeleton and come up with something that looks totally different from the others. And so that shows you how much imagination is involved there, because these artists look at the same skeleton and they come up with something that looks totally different from what the other artists came up with.
I mean, if you look at the history of the artistic depictions of dinosaurs 100 years ago compared to today, it's vastly different. 100 years ago, they're reptilian, they've got no hair, they have no feathers, scaly skin, they were considered cold-blooded. Now, most people think, well, that's stupid. Of course dinosaurs had feathers because they're related to birds and they were warm-blooded mammals, and well, what changed? We've had the same fossils for 100 years, what changed? Did you have your hand up?
Yes, I can't remember this guy's name, but I read a book in the last 20 years anyway, I think closely, but, well, anyway, this was a doctor, and I think he might have been a dentist. He decided to go around Europe to all the places where they had the animals.
what did y'all learn about tonight? What did you learn about tonight? Animals. So, God's creation, right? God created the animals. What else did God create? What else did you learn about?
This.
What is that?
It's a bear.
A bear. God created all the animals. And God created us. And God created what? The fish and the birds. Very good. So we're going to sing a song. And I'm going to need some help. I'm going to ask Brother Dick to help me out with this. So I need a couple volunteers. Come on. Come on, Caleb. What do you do here? So you want to start lining up over here? All right. All right. I need one more. Yep. Hallie. You've got special instructions with yours. So you want to stand right there. All right. So we're going to sing another song about Noah. All right? Good old Noah built the ark like God told him to. And on that ark he made a snake like God told him to. With a s here and a s there, here a s, there a s, everywhere a s. If you do what God says do, he will bless you too. Good old Noah built the ark like God told him to. And on that ark he put some cows like God told him to. With a moo-moo here and a moo-moo there, here a moo, there a moo, everywhere a moo-moo. If you do what God says do, he will bless you too. Good old Noah built the ark like God told him to. And on that ark he put some sheep like God told him to. With a ba-ba here and a ba-ba there, here a ba, there a ba, everywhere a ba-ba. If you do what God says do, he will bless you too. Good old Noah built the ark like God told him to. And on that ark he put some cats like God told him to. With a meow meow here and a meow meow there, here a meow, there a meow, everywhere a meow meow. If you do what God says do, he will bless you too. Good old Noah built the ark like God told him to. And on that ark he put some dogs like God told him to. With a bow wow here and a bow wow there, here a bow, there a bow, everywhere a bow bow. If you do what God says do, he will bless you too. Good old Noah built the ark like God told him to. And on that ark he put a giraffe like God told him to. With a bow wow here and a bow wow there, here a bow, there a bow, everywhere a bow bow, meow meow here, meow meow there, here a meow, there a meow, everywhere a meow meow, ba ba here, ba ba there, here a ba, there a ba, everywhere a ba ba, moo moo here, moo moo there, here a moo, there a moo, everywhere a moo moo, here, there, here, there, everywhere. If you do what God says do, he will bless you too. All right. Thank y'all so much. Y'all want to give those back to Mr. D? Thank y'all so much.
It's a rock.
So you know, another thing that God made were little bitty things. Right? So first off, look what we have in our tree up here. What do we have up there? A bird. What do we have over here? A dolphin. God made this. So want to thank the Stubblefields and the Martins, kind of not used to saying that, for creating this. All right? So God made some little bitty things. So let's sing about some little bitty things. God made the little bitty birds that fly way up high in the sky. God made the little bitty birds that fly just for you and me. God made the little bitty buzzy bee that gathers honey from flowers and trees. God made the little bitty buzzy bee just for you and me. God made the little bitty bugs that crawl in their hole in the ground. God made the little bitty bugs that crawl just for you and me. God made the little bitty butterfly that flies away as you go by. God made the little bitty butterfly just for you and me. God made the little bitty worm that's green, so he crawls, he can't be seen. God made the little bitty worm that's green just for you and me. God made the little bitty babies too that gurgle and coo, yes they do. God made the little bitty babies too just for you and me. All right. So you know, you're going to have to come back tomorrow night. All right? So you're going to have to come back tomorrow. Do you know why you're going to have to come back tomorrow night?
Why?
Because you're going to learn a little bit more about God's creation. You know what you're going to learn about tomorrow night in God's creation? You're going to be learning about dinosaurs. All right? So when you come in tomorrow, this is going to be changed again. All right? So you've got to come back tomorrow night. All right? It's going to be very tempting for you to come up here and try to touch some things, but you got to make sure you keep your hands away. All right? We're going to sing one more song tonight. So when we become a Christian, we do what God says to do. All right? And when we become a Christian, God says that we can live eternally. And where can we live eternally? In heaven. Thank you. In heaven. I am a C. I am a CH. I am a CHRISTIAN. And I have CHRIST in my HERIT. And I will LIVETERNALLY. Let's sing it one more time. I am a C. I am a CH. I am a CHRISTIAN. And I have ST in my HERIT. And I will LIVETERNALLY. Very good. All right. So remember, you got to come back tomorrow night. All right. So I'm going to ask Brother Mike if he will lead prayer before we're dismissed. So remember, after the prayer, all right, everybody stay where they're at just for a little bit while we sing Booster. So let's all stand. Remember our prayer hands. Let's get our prayer hands up.
Our dear Heavenly Father, we come to you tonight so thankful, Lord, for the opportunity we've had together again tonight. We're so thankful, Lord, for all the work that the teachers have put in and those brothers and sisters put things together this week. We're so thankful for their work. We pray, Lord, that all the children are gleaning a stronger faith in your word and your creation and believing that you are the creator of all things. Lord, we pray that you'll be with us tonight as we all go home. Keep us safe. Pray that you forgive us of our sins. In your son's precious name we pray.
Amen. Thank you, Brother Mike. And I would like to thank Sister Courtney, too, for making that giraffe a couple of years ago for us. Booster, booster, be a booster. Don't be grouchy like a rooster. Booster, booster, be a booster. And boost our Bible school. Booster!